I'm going to give you a debrief, a download from me as to where I see things and a couple of key issues in my mind with association reform. And then, so you understand where I'm coming from, and then let's open up a conversation from there. So, as I mentioned earlier, ASC mandated governance principles. The Australian Sports Commission has recently released guidelines regarding governance across all sports, and it is actively engaged with Hockey Australia and a number of other sports around this. And you might ask, well, what are those governance principles? What do they mean? They want a reflection of all sports to ensure that there is regional metropolitan balance across the games, have a strong participation focus, and also at board level, from the top down. And if you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. In fact, I put it to you that the current board that we have has an almost ideal balance of regional metropolitan male-female interests served in New South Wales. That model is what is being mandated and pushed. And they want simplified, unified structures across all sports. So there's a lot of sports who I don't think have gone through the right thinking and thought processes yet, and they're in for a challenging time. And that is one of our opportunities to get ahead of that curve and to take advantage of the disruption that they will go through in the future. So gender balanced structures. To be transparent, we have been approached by Hockey Australia to request that we move to these structures. Maybe putting it a little bit more bluntly, we've had pursuit. Please explain. So we own the timing and the agenda and the reform. We need to do this before it's mandated on us. There'll be a point where it will be mandated on us. Don't let it get to that. What are the future outcomes that we're looking for? More efficient operating structures between the state body and each association and region. Closer connections of the objects of Hockey New South Wales and the associations around, and that is around development, transparency, all of those things. When you're bored one night, go have a read within the current constitution. The objects are very important parts. And some of our association structures do not integrate the fabric of what we want to do between New South Wales and other association bodies. We need to address that. I'm looking for improved application and delivery of services from between the state and associations, service delivery and growth initiatives. Improved transparency, and I think I'm ultimately expecting that our volunteer roles become more defined. It's not a silver bullet, but they will become more defined as to do those roles. Here's some of the key issues as I see them, preliminary up front. How we consult and cooperate is key. It's absolutely key. How we've got to jointly acknowledge that some change will be difficult. It's not insurmountable. As I said in my speech earlier today, the risks are short-term, but the benefits are long-term. And how do we have an efficient state body and association structure but also maintain a historical identity? I'll address a couple of these issues in a second. I want to talk about consultation because if you go back to the original memorandum that came out on association reform, it was quite deliberately in the first couple of paragraphs worded about what we're trying to do and why we've got to do it. But we need to provide some principles about what we're trying to do here. I think I've got about 3 groups of associations. Associations fall into one of like 3 groups here. 1, this doesn't affect them. Probably about half. Then there are some associations that with some structural change can quite readily conform and apply to the changes. And then there are those that need a lot of work. So we want to make sure that we provide advice to those groups, and we'll be putting quite some information on that. Communication needs to be timely and unambiguous. Okay? So what I know, or we know as a collective, will be known by all. There is no question of with information having power and influence and any of that. So I want to be clear about that principle. No hidden agendas and transparency. We are appointing an advisory panel to help us with this process. The advisory panel will include people on it with the skills you need and we need to help you get over the line. They're going to be people with commercial skills, negotiation skills, media, communication. All of these things will be on that panel, and we'll get people on that panel who will provide support either directly to the 2 associations or they will provide access to resources and other things. We're going to need those. We're going to need that for up and running. So I just want you to be aware that that panel will be up and running shortly. I want to touch on a couple of issues and be really quite frank and down to earth where we're at. There's a couple of key issues that just are top of mind for the board and the management and yourself. And I don't have a blueprint solution for you that I'm going to give you today, but I want you to know that they're well advanced in thinking and they're well advanced as a priority, so that you are quite clear on this. Past versus future. We must work to collectively not lose our heritage in some areas. We don't want to do that. There are I've seen some feedback, well, that just means my association, which doesn't fit in the new framework, will completely disappear. That is not the case. That we are looking at strategies to do that. We have, I might say, a preferred state championship model that protects and grandfathers current state championship participation. But until I have it all wrapped up in a nice bow and approved by my friends on the board, I don't want to release it to the hockey community until it's gone through some correct consultation process. But I'm very confident that the drafts that we've seen today that we'll be able to do that. The other is we were looking at other membership options of Hockey New South Wales for in the future that will retain a connection. So I want you to be aware that we're looking at those things, and we would be announcing most of these things as soon as possible once resolved. I've just got one more slide before I open it up for some questions and sort of feedback. My favourite word, fun. We don't need money. There's a lot of stuff going out there doing this to get money, consolidate entities and bring funds in. Please, that is not part of it. That this is totally unplanned. This reform's been discussed at previous President's Forum and at length. And so please don't think that it's totally unplanned. That is not true if you hear it. In fact, there are some associations that have actually been undertaking this process well before now. I wrote all these just the other day. They're not serious. We're serious. This is aimed at women's associations. I actually thought twice about putting this up, but you just got to put it out there. It's not aimed at women's associations. It's aimed at what we believe is best for Hockey New South Wales as a collective. Okay. So I promise that's the last of my slides. I'll open up for just some general Q&A.
I just wonder, in the process leading up to this, have you had some form of consultation with people such as Cox Harbour? Has there been some one-on-ones, or has it just been, as we're seeing it today, had any opportunity to talk to the people affected?
Yeah, it varies across different areas, but as I said, we've had it at President's Forum. We've talked to a number of associations, directly and indirectly. What I would say is that we've spent quite a lot of time last year and this year planning on and making sure structurally what does the result look like as well. And I got this question in your packs from some associations, so maybe if I can answer that as well, if you don't mind, mate. Someone said, well, do you know what the future state looks like? The answer is, I have a view. We actually have a view. But frankly, it is not for me to mandate and to unduly influence what the makeup of that might look like with associations. It needs to be a collaborative thing. I would totally expect that where some associations will need more consultation than others. Right? So if I've got a regional zone where I've got 3 associations, male, female, juniors, the level of consultation required to help that to get across the line versus a group of other associations without such a defined structure, totally different. So they need a lot more hand-holding than would be done. I think what we have to say is that from my point of view, it's like kimono's open. Here we are. We're on our way. And now I see, really importantly, the next steps you'll see from us is a ramp up in consultation, not just through advisory panels. You'll see myself, other members of the board, and Tony starting to come out to open discussions with some of you or many of you. If not just for us to tell you what we think, but we actually want to hear how things are going, and then we'll be taking through some assessments as we go.
Thanks, Scott. I think we all understand that there's change needed, hockey's threatened. We understand that the points of anxiety that you raised earlier, the 4 points, I just wonder how we get to a position like that, whereas it's about communication, it's about people understanding what the intent is, and there should be no real need for us to be anxious or have any concern about our future if the process is done correctly.
No, can I just say, if I got paid in my job by PowerPoint, I'd be a rich man. I mean, I do so many presentations. And today, figuring out what words to put down on here and what to say to you has been really, really difficult for me. Other than to say that you'll start to see from us a lot of consultation and a lot of help how to get this over the line. It will start with advisory panels, it will start with specific assistance required, but we need you to start talking to us on that as well. Ray.
You think this is hard, you should have gone through the amalgamation. But really, it's common sense. We know it has to happen. It's not just the board saying, hey, you're going to do this. So they can say, be proactive. My association has already contacted several associations and clubs to ensure that we can get together, work out the aims that the three of us have that can be amalgamated to make us still an entity at Hockey New South Wales. We love the game. I mean, I'm like a member of my club and my association. So what? It's still hockey, whether you're playing it as Parramatta Women's or Bullamacanka Juniors. And that's what we should be thinking about.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi. Yep.
I'm a player, I'm an official, and I'm very frustrated by the fact you're saying it's meant to be open and you want to have a consultation. We had consultation, we had the white paper, we voted this down resoundingly, and now you're saying, tough, this is where we're going. Set it up, get on with it. I find that offensive.
Sure.
And I think that people that have put a lot into this sport for a long time are just being trodden over and not listened to. And you're now rushing this discussion to get to lunch when I thought we were going to have an open and informative workshop on it. That's my thoughts.
Yep, thank you. I really need to respond to that, and I do appreciate the comments, by the way. This has got nothing to do with the white paper. Put it in the past. It's got nothing to do with the white paper. The consultation, I've already talked about the reasons why for change. The consultation is important. We understand it, and as I said earlier in my previous address, we're not going away. We're in it with you, and we'll provide all the resources and support and services that you need. But it requires us to talk together for you to tell us what you need so we can go and find a way to get that done. And I'm going to do one little, just before we go to your question, I just want to give you a scenario, because a question came up, mindful of time, at lunch. I'm mindful of there are some associations that have, say, 400 plus members, but not 400 plus. I've got a query on that. Come and talk to us. Simple as that. The board has a right in its charter to make decisions that are strategic for the state. It's not merge for merge's sake. So please take that message as best as I can give it.
Sorry, that sort of answers some of my question.
Oh, cool.
My question is, your regional associations that, for geographic reasons, cannot possibly hope to merge with another association. We have 260 members, and we've worked extremely hard over the last few years to become financially viable. We don't own any assets, we don't have our grounds, we use all local council grounds, we're set to certain times of the year that we can actually use them. But we don't have the option of joining with Tamworth or Maitland or anywhere else to get our 500 members.
Yep. No, look, I understand what you're saying. There's no answer to that is not difficult or that can't be resolved though. Okay? Now, if I interpret how you receive that message versus how it's delivered, right, you might go, well, that's a bit, of a non-answer, right? Once we go through the structure of certain areas of our state that, as we go through this, where we cannot resolve what needs to be done, we will actually come and help consult that with you and figure out what that might look like and give options. Okay? We've done that before, and we have a view, as I said before, but it's really unfair for us to come and tell you what our view is straight away. Okay? So I take your point very, very sincerely and genuinely. Sorry,
Can I say something to Liz?
Sure. Just introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, g'day. My name's Tommy. I'm the new kid on the block. I'm just an independent director, so I have no affiliation or preference with one hockey association or club or whatever to another. But I think that as a new bloke on the block, I think it's very important that I say this because it is important to us as well as you that we all understand that we're actually very serious about developing and growing the sport called hockey in New South Wales. I think that's the most important thing I can communicate today. That's why we're here. Can I encourage you not to think that this is, we have the power to do it and therefore we're doing it. This is about what is the best interest of the sport versus the individual interests of the associations. That's a very hard equation to balance. So if you think that you're in a position where you're going, how am I going to do this? Imagine how much more difficult it is for people who are trying to have a vested interest and a responsibility back to you to try and make this work. So your question is fundamental to the whole reason why we need to work this out. And we need you to come on board and say, mate, this isn't going to work, and how are we going to fix it? And then it's our duty and our responsibility to the game to make sure that we assist in resolving that issue. So I do not want you to think, and we as a collective don't want you to think, that we're going to leave that out. That's not the point. The point is hockey. It is more important than one person. It is a collective, and that's what we're trying to aim to. Having said that, there are associations that are risking a lot here, and clubs, and I can understand that as well. But surely the overriding thing must be what is in the best interest of the game to develop and grow within this state. That's the first thing I want to say. The other thing is, I think as a board, there needs to be much more accountability and transparency and effective implementation of the strategy of compliance. And we need to keep pace with the laws and, what society's telling us, including social media. So, me coming on this board, there's a lot of work to do here. It's not just you. It's not just how we're going to amend the association. we all, including the board, have to step up. I mean a couple of steps, not just one. I consider and I expect that this become a truly professional organisation. And when I say that, I mean not just Hockey New South Wales as an entity, but hockey in New South Wales, including and taking along with us the associations, whatever that will mean in years to come. So I think that's a very important point. That will only come from three areas. That will come from experience, that will come from knowledge, but it will also come from mistakes. So these are the things where you need to come back and say, Larry, that was a stuff up, mate. But that's okay. How are we going to fix it next year, right? And that's where the implementation of governance and policy will really take hold, and that's how we move forward. So I want to start turning heads in respect of us as an organisation. I want you to believe that we are here for you, because that's the honest intention of what we're trying to achieve. And I want us to be the benchmark entity that leads and nurtures the growth, but more importantly, the sustainability of this sport in this state. Which means that if we don't have your best interest at heart, it ain't going to happen. And the way it's going to happen is with reform. It has to, otherwise we're going to be left behind. I mean, you can see the implications of the Olympics and the way that hockey's being reflected in that. I mean, we've got to make some changes here, people, and it includes the board as well. And we can't do it alone. But more importantly, you need to embrace change. And it may not come in the form that maybe initially suggested, but change is coming. We have to. We have to compete with the other sporting codes out there to retain and grow the people that will stay in the sport. The other thing is, very importantly, if we don't change, we're not going to attract government funding. If we don't attract government funding, it's going to be very difficult to thrive. And if we don't thrive, then, you know, your love of the sport is going to go somewhere where you don't want it to go. I mean, I don't want it to be us versus them or Larry out there trying to justify a position. We are here in the best interest of everyone in this room, but things have to change. And I understand that you understand that, but it comes at a risk and it comes at a sacrifice from our end and from yours. So we're just going to have to work together on that. Please accept that, because it's coming, and that's what we're going to have to do. And I suppose the bottom line in all of this change, notwithstanding what we're doing about, you know, what the government is saying, and notwithstanding what's happening with drugs in sport, and you know, there's ICAC and all these other organisations that are really coming to the surface, is that the bottom line is we need to leave the game much better than when we came in. We cannot just look at this for us being in the sport right now. After we leave, it's something that we want to look at for our future children and other people entering into the sport. And that means we're going through a bit of a fire. And, you know, I'd like to think that we all just try and embrace this a bit more. And the only way you're going to do that is if we become much more transparent in what we're trying to do here. The only way we're going to get comfortable with this is if we're very transparent. And that's what we intend to do. All right? So, that's what I want to say.
If you've ever doubted that we selectively choose independent directors with experience, I've just been addressed for you, Bruce.
Bruce from Grafton again. With merger-wise, Grafton Hockey and the women are going through very, very positive talks at the moment, so I can't say it's I believe in the future it will be a great thing for us.
Yep.
And we've gone in with very open eyes and how we're doing things. My one was about the model of the associations at the moment. Can you just confirm to me what you just, I believe you said earlier? Say Coffs Harbour having less than 500,
Yep.
would need to affiliate with someone?
No. We put a limit of 500, but what we said in the communication is that if there are areas that have less than 500, that the board and the associations can demonstrate are strategic, that we will look at that. Okay?
So you're talking about the membership for those sort of...
Membership for that association.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they wouldn't have to worry us because we may not want to take them on. Not saying that in a bad way, it's an incredible merger. We don't want to take on another association, we're just going through a merger process. We don't want that problematic issue that they're running their own competition and association currently, and that's how they should be left to run.
Debbie from Hockey Coast Coastal Coffs Harbour. That's okay. It's pleasing to hear that there will be further patient. I guess I have been a letter on the High Association board. It just has been this week. I did speak with Tony and police as soon as the memo was released. And in fairness to the board, they wouldn't have had an opportunity to have probably read my letter yet.
I've read it.
Oh, thank you then. And I know they'll respond in due course, but I'm really happy to hear that there will be further consultation and get the message now, which I get, that you're there to assist us all. It wasn't actually how the wording of the memo came out, and no personal criticisms of anybody there. We're just in, I guess, a regional area. We've got geographical constraints. We've got 428 members, I think it was, at the close of winter season. I think I've picked up about another 20 people in summer, so I'm getting there. Building those numbers, trying to get to that 500 number mark. We want to remain an association. We get on really well with our neighbours. Grafton's the closest to us in the north, which is about 80 k's one way. 2 hour distance to the south, 2 and a bit to the west, and in the east, well, that's the ocean. So, you know, we've got people now that they just won't travel that distance. Costs, we're in a high unemployment area. There's many reasons, you know, why there's lack of numbers. We have consistently had 550 to 520 for many years. Dropped down last year, dropped down a little bit more this year. You know, we're here to, I guess, work with the board and Hockey New South Wales and other associations, and yeah, I'm pleased to hear that there'll be further consultation on this.
Yeah, I think, thank you, and I really, there's a few comments you've made that are important, but, you know, I don't know what the silver bullet and resolution is for every individual case. You know, that comes up across certain associations, and do we get 2 of us together, 3 of us together? I can tell you that there are some associations and even clubs who are thinking very innovatively about this. And there are conversations going on. I encourage everyone to talk that way. And the challenges that you've got with some of the growth that you're talking about, these are some of the primary reasons we need to do what we've got to do. Because if we don't have a most efficient organisation structure with service delivery from New South Wales body, through association, right through with all the programs we've put up, it will not work. It will not work. And I tell you, honestly, we will go backwards. Not because we want to, or we're not working hard enough, we will just go backwards by design in the future. Tolly talked about funding. I didn't want to bring it up because I just didn't want to say, well, if we don't do it, we're just going to lose a whole bunch of money. But it's true. All right, any other questions? Yep. Hi.
Yes, question Gamble. Just
Hi,
a
Chris.
query. 500 was the number that you struck, and I guess you had to have a number, so 500 is quite reasonable. You aim to have associations by combining or have you reach that. What happens to an association that exists already that is well over that? Do they then get divided up into lumps of 500?
Oh, no.
Specifically Sydney men.
No, definitely not. They can do, yeah, no, definitely
What
not.
happens to them?
Yeah, no, they can stay, you know, as an association. The 500 is just a minimum number. charter.
Let's say it's one run.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, are they single gender associations?
Oh, no, that is, the gender balance needs to be met. 25% of either male or female. Yeah.
Basically all those
Yeah. Yes.
So it's not just if you've got 1,000 people, members, they're not
Yeah,
just
sure.
1,000 male or female, it's got to meet all those other criteria.
Yep.
So if you've got 1,200 men, then you somehow or other have to get 25% women. And you've got to then have the juniors, all the ages, including that. So it's not one by itself.
Right. Thank you, Lynn.
Can I just know what the process is for the consultation with the board? Thank you. Like we ring up, make an appointment, we have these gatherings where you come to our association. I'm not really...
It's actually a really good question. I'm gonna dog Tony in here, but we're gonna have Tony Bash, being an old footballer, who's going to help me up later. But we'll have a dedicated, we're going to have a dedicated email portal in with staff making sure that I talked about communications, so that we've got consistent communications. We know who's contacted us and wants assistance from when and who and where. That's the first piece. We'll have the advisory panel set up, the minutes and all of those sorts of good governance principles will all be totally adhered to. So if Association A says I have a question and we answer it, it's combined. If it's a question relevant to all associations, it'll be opened up for all associations. So we'll do that, but we haven't got it all set up yet, Karen. Okay. Cliff.
Yeah. Just can I have a little bit of comments from your end? If we go back to first principles on this whole issue, it's really driven back by the Australian Sports Commission, and then perhaps also reflecting on the poor results in London. And when they brought out the mandating sports governance principles, they in fact targeted 5 sports for which these principles would be forced through, which effectively meant Hockey Australia were involved in setting up these principles at that level.
Yep.
They then mandated that it comes further down through the chain to each of the states' associations and now back through to our associations. So in effect, if I recall correctly, 2 years ago we saw a graph or a chart, pie chart of the funding from the Australian Sports Commission to Hockey Australia was well over 90% of the total costs of running Hockey Australia. So if in effect this whole process doesn't work, that 90% of funding from ASC could be well cut back.
Yep.
Which would be, firstly, as one point, is a matter of increased fees back to every member of this association. The other thing that flows through from that is the principles which are mandated by ASC, which apply to Hockey Australia, which is the applying body. As they come down through the situation, that puts our board between a rock and a hard place, as I understand it.
It does.
Where they've been given the role of causing it to happen further down, and in their wisdom they've set up what are a set of guidelines. And I use the word guidelines because from what I see, you've got a range of associations, say Young or Chima, which none of us want to lose out of the system. We're across to some very large associations, combining with 2,000 people. And unfortunately, the one shoe doesn't fit all sizes. And what I see is that from the Hockey New South Wales situation, I should say, there's a fair degree of flexibility in the way in which you can apply the requirements of ASC to still achieve the ends that are required and still maintain the two characteristics that I mentioned previously, that is going forward and also maintaining the heritage of our association.
Yeah. Okay, so
And I understand that, as I said, being put between a rock and a hard place with that consultation and understanding of the situation. I think if people really understand that it's been driven from virtually the Australian government through the Australian Sports Commission and then further down, we need to move in that direction because we have no choice. But I believe, as you've already said, our New South Wales board has a fair degree of flexibility in the way in which they reach the end conclusions that are required.
So let me answer two key things here. Yes, there is a funding issue for the Australian government by HA, and they have made funding of Hockey Australia not just performance-based on the field. It's on governance and it's on all sports. So there is money at risk for all sports. Regarding the issue of criteria and flexibility, the criteria for association reform was very carefully thought out and constructed. I understand there's no one size fits all, but it is designed to be able for us to all collectively have a most efficient structure to deliver the benefits of the game in the future, to grow, to be organisationally efficient, top to bottom, bottom to top. So there will be a situation where there are some associations in their current form and who are not associations in the new form. So when I talked about earlier in my presentation about finding other ways to protect the heritage, particularly around state championships, which I know is a big issue, that is an example of areas where we'll put out some guidance and thought on for everybody, so that we can deal with that. So that will be done, but the guidelines and the framework that we put out are extremely important to deliver, not only to comply with our requirements, our governance requirements, but to deliver in a real practical sense, to deliver services. Now, I am mindful of time. I think I'm up to 2, so I'm 2:05. I'd really like to say that I want to finish this part of the session and continue it over lunch, if that's okay with everybody. Bistro closes at 2:30. You've all had a super long day, and I appreciate that. All right, thank you everybody. Thank you for your